Hello everyone, and welcome to another Salesforce Ben webinar where we partner with various well-known ISVs from around the Salesforce ecosystem. And I'm very excited to be here today with Prodly. So the last webinar we did with Prodly, we spoke all about an introduction to DevOps, and it was really popular. And today we're speaking about Devops Center, the future of change sets, which is also extremely relevant to anyone in the Salesforce ecosystem. So we thought we'd kick off with a poll, which is, where do you begin dev work today? And you'll kind of see why this is so relevant later on in the webinar. And by the way, thank you very much for joining. We'd love to hear where you're from in the chat, if there is a chat. Not sure if there is, but if there is, let us know. Usually I have quite a global audience, so thank you for dialing in wherever you are in the world. So we're just going to finish off this poll, wait for everyone to dial in, and then we can get started. And from what I can see, the results are pretty interesting, actually.
Yeah, looks pretty good.
All right, still a few people dialing in. Welcome to everyone who's just dialing in. We're just going to get started in a minute or in a second. And we're talking about Devops Center. Okay, there we go. Very interesting. What do you think about that, Derek?
Yeah, it seems like we got a pretty good group here. This is maybe just a few more people using dev orgs than I expected, but I guess if you separate out scratch orgs, it's pretty low. So yeah, it's pretty, not too surprising, but a little bit that people are following these best practices pretty well.
Yeah, and I would imagine maybe a lot of people don't know what scratch orgs are either, because they're not kind of, mass market yet. So if you don't, you'll be sure to know later on. So let's get started then. So thank you very much for joining. Just a few things before we kick off. So this is a webinar, so everyone is on mute. If you've got any questions, please drop them in the Q&A box. We will get around to them at the end, but if you think of any throughout the session, please drop them in. We'll get to as many as we can. And we will be recording this as well, so this will be sent around afterwards. So you can send it to your colleagues, or if you need to drop off, no worries, it's all recorded, it's all safe. So to introduce myself, so my name is Ben McCarthy. I'm founder of Salesforce Ben and editor at Salesforce Ben, which is the world's largest Salesforce publisher. We publish about 10 to 15 blog posts a week about all kinds of different topics. If you like Salesforce, you should like Salesforce Ben, so check it out. And it's my pleasure to be joined here today by Derek. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Derek. I'm the Director of Customer Experience at Prodly. Before that, I worked at this company called Salesforce. I worked as a product manager and a solution architect, and have seen literally hundreds of orgs and worked on hundreds of projects that have gone live. A lot of that built in the CPQ or Salesforce Revenue Cloud practice.
Great, thank you, Derek. So let's get started. So what is the Devops Center? So Devops Center is a free product which is going to be released in beta in the summer for general release later in the year. So Derek, can you please tell us what is the Devops Center?
Yeah, so Devops Center is this cool thing that Salesforce has put together because a lot of people have not been super happy with change sets. They're not the easiest things to use. You have to go through many pages to find something that may be a change, maybe it's not a change, it's just a field or something like that, and you have to pick all the right things. There's a lot of cross-referencing that you may need to do between documentation that you have or other people's work to understand what you need to include in a change set. So Devops Center is moving away from that old paradigm of hunting and finding what changes you might need to move from a developer's sandbox to a full copy, or from a full copy to production, to really fit more what we see across enterprise applications that allow you to do versioning. So Devops Center is the first true made by Salesforce integration to a repository. They're going to start with GitHub. And it's going to be really the future of change sets. You'll be able to immediately find differences between what you've built in the dev org or a scratch org, and then what actually exists in production, or at least the next step in your pipeline to production, to find stuff a lot easier. And it's a great way to bring administrators and developers together, that they can be using kind of the same tool set. Because right now, a lot of developers, they are developing and pushing things to VS Code or Azure. They have their repositories and systems for managing their code that they're making, whereas the admins don't have that type of tool set. So this is putting everyone essentially on the same platform to use the same things for change management in Salesforce.
Great, thank you. And if you're like me, you have to use Chrome extensions sometimes to use change sets properly. So hopefully that'll change as well. So I think Devops Center was released or announced, sorry, back in 2019. So it's been a few years, there's been a few delays, but what can we actually expect when Devops Center comes out? What are like the features that are included with it?
Yeah, sure. So just a note around the timeline, we talked to the project manager in charge of Devops Center. Because this is not, it's its own managed package, it's not going to be tied directly to a Salesforce release. So you can expect updates to this, as they come out rather than waiting for a release. So we should be seeing this, it's currently in closed beta, and we should be seeing an open beta for this sometime in the summer, so June, July timeframe. And then they're looking for it to be GA around Dreamforce, so in the fall. Then it will be available to anyone. So when it goes to open beta, any Salesforce customers will be able to see that they can enable this functionality in their orgs to start using it. And then GA is sort of the same thing. You'll be able to enable this. So what it's going to kind of look like is, it's going to introduce the concept of projects, where it's kind of a bit of a governance or project management tool that's inside of Devops Center. And I'll show you that in a demo a bit, but a way to organize your work, to say, hey, I have a project where I need to calculate ARR on accounts or something like that. So annual recurring revenue, I want to know what that is. I need to build a flow to calculate what that is. And inside of that project, you'll have different work items. So you'll add your fields, you'll do maybe Apex development, you'll have whatever pieces of the puzzle for the project that need to be done to be assigned to different people. And then with that, they're going to also introduce pipelines. And pipelines are a general DevOps concept of where you move work from a developer environment all the way up to production. So no more just making all your changes in prod. Some people are maybe doing some of that here. That wasn't accounted for in the poll, but we didn't put you on blast or shame you for that. But for people, those 4% using scratch orgs, that percentage is going to grow. And Devops Center is going to be a tool that's going to enable you to more easily use scratch orgs and pull the changes out of those and move them up a pipeline. So you'll go from a scratch org to an integration sandbox where you will bundle up your changes, and then you'll move that to your full copy to do staging or UAT testing, and then you'll push that to prod from there. Some of the existing things that this is leveraging are version control systems. So the first piece of this will be to use GitHub as a version control system for this. There's also source tracking, which is available in dev and scratch orgs right now. So you'll need to enable that through Developer Hub. It's pretty easy, one-click setup to do that, as well as using scratch orgs, which are existing, but according to our poll, have a pretty low adoption.
Great, thank you very much, Derek. So we're going to go to a poll now. So after we've done our first one and find out how you are developing. So are you doing source-driven development today? So it'll be interesting to see as well. Numbers are changing rapidly, the ratios.
This is falling into about what I expected to.
Yeah. Yeah, when I was consulting a couple of years ago, 18 months ago, majority of people definitely weren't, but I think that was, 18 months is a long time ago in Salesforce.
Oh yeah, for sure.
There we go. So kind of what you expected then, Derek?
Yeah, I mean, this is a little high than what I normally see, but I mean, your audience is a bunch of smart people trying to do the latest and greatest cool stuff. So um, I think more in reality, it's probably about a quarter rather than a third of people that are doing source-driven development in Salesforce. Um, I'm surprised that a quarter have no plans to implement and no problems there from the probably perspective. We want to support people that are at all phases of these, you know, desires to go to source-driven development.
Yeah, definitely. Well, hopefully we can change their minds by the end of this, by the end of the webinar.
Yeah.
So why is Salesforce building DevOps Center now? Oops, sorry. Yeah, Salesforce building DevOps Center now. I mean, a few of you may remember a few years ago, Salesforce actually got voted by developers as one of the worst platforms to work with. And in true Salesforce style, they quickly came out with the Salesforce DX developer experience, which was meant for developers and admins to create a better experience building on the Salesforce platform. And they've been doing that over the past couple of years. Derek was talking about scratch orgs and source-driven development, and some of these features, these plugins, code plugins that Salesforce are developing. But largely, they've kind of ignored the admin experience. So the DevOps Center is meant to be for developers and admins to come together and to provide a much easier way to deploy changes and change sets, because I'm sure no one here absolutely loves change sets. And I mean, I've been around the Salesforce ecosystem for 10 years now, and they haven't been updated once. So we probably think it's about time. But Derek, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, sure. So DevOps as a practice, it's all about accelerating innovation and de-risking, like eliminating risks of these changes. So by applying the principles of you can ship small and often and build an isolated environment, so you're not stepping on each other's toes, overriding each other's work, getting in fights about what the page layout should look like, things like that, and also allowing you to automate deployments, so you're not waiting on someone to click a button and waiting on putting together a change set with a lot of manual work. All these things have been really difficult to do in Salesforce because of the ability to set up environments. So someone asked in the questions, like, can you use DevOrgs and scratch orgs with this? Of course, you can use both, and they both work really well, and they both have like their places to be used, and they're going to support that. But I think the big reason is that they've had a diminished tool set for too long, and they want to expand that. So moving beyond change sets and giving people the power to do source driven development is going to be huge for the admin and developer community, as well as anyone that's hiring out like consultants or something like that. Being able to understand what's going on in their orgs and set them up with their own pipelines will be a really big win for merging together all of that work, that you have various contributors doing a lot of things to give your end users the best experience. This is going to help a lot.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So moving on. So when anyone ever talks about DevOps, it's not just about you using the tools. It's also about a mind shift as well. Using different processes, not just different tools. And we saw from the poll. I mean, what was it? It was quite a low amount of people, or still quite a high portion of people using partial and full sandboxes initially. But obviously this needs to change with using DevOps Center. If I'm right, I think Derek, I'm right in saying it's either is it DevOps or scratch orgs. But what do you think about this? Do you think people are ready to kind of to take this paradigm shift?
I think according to the poll, like, some people are already there, and I think that these people that are saying that they have no plans to implement this are going to at some point be envious. So the concept of using like DevOrgs and scratch orgs, it's a bit intimidating to people that either just have small teams and they say, I don't need to do this. Like, we only have 3 people working on our team. We can do everything in a partial copy. But your organization is going to grow if you're doing a good job of what you're doing. So you're going to need to have more places to do work. And with DevOps Center, Salesforce is saying there's a smarter way to do this. And they're putting together this kind of admin layer for DX to give you all the rich benefits that you have from having orgs on demand. So, there's one of the big hurdles to cross of using dev orgs and scratch orgs is the very obvious thing. There's no data in them. So there's not an easy way to immediately start using those and be able to test what's going to happen to an account or an opportunity with your new automations or anything like that. So you might need something in place to seed the sandboxes or seed the scratch orgs to do that. So you're not clicking new over and over again on account and then opportunity and contact and opportunity products or whatever you need to do to make a rich experience to test whatever new functionality you're doing. So kind of the same story with scratch orgs. There's maybe even no metadata in them by default. You need to make definition files or org shapes, if you've heard of those, which maybe you haven't. So we have a very small amount of people that are using scratch orgs right now, and I might want to talk about that a bit more. Scratch orgs, in my opinion, are really superior to dev orgs for one fact, that they're ready immediately. You make a scratch org, you can be using it, in 15 seconds after you've created it. Whereas dev orgs, who knows when they're going to be ready? I was lucky for this demo yesterday I made a whole bunch of new dev orgs and they were ready in about 30, 40 minutes. But sometimes those can, take days to show up. And I had a backup plan in mind, like if these don't get created, I'm going to just go use these other ones that I have sitting somewhere. So that's one huge benefit for scratch orgs. A paradigm shift, though, is like admins are not going into DX to create one. And something we're doing at Proudly is we're going to give like a button click to automatically create them. And maybe Salesforce is going to look into this as well, of getting the dev console out of this. So right now you have to use command line to generate a scratch org, which people aren't comfortable with. And then the other paradigm shift is like everyone is addicted to data. I kind of talked about this a bit before, like in a full copy or partial, you have your go-to accounts that you do testing on. And those aren't there necessarily in a dev or a scratch org. So you don't want to bother with the hassle of trying to recreate something that is close to whatever you have in production. You want to make sure that your new work doesn't mess up something for your most important accounts that you have or specific corner cases that you built out. So having that data available immediately is something, a bit of a crutch that's been keeping people outside of dev orgs and scratch orgs.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Derek. So let's, well, I mean, actually, first it'd be good to cover before we move on, using change sets. I mean, a lot of people, set up deployment paths and things like that, but there's no best practices built into change sets themselves. But I believe Devops Center is all about the linear flow, deploying from staging to UAT to production. So do you mind talking a little bit more about that before we move on?
Yeah, sure. And I think this is a really good introduction by Salesforce to help with the mindset shift of best practices for development. There's plenty of accelerators out there that Salesforce gives on best practice for application lifecycle management and how you need to use your orgs and how to best use specific types of sandboxes. But there's really nothing in the product to enforce that. So with DevOps Center, I mean, the enforcement is kind of light, but they give you a framework of a pipeline of your work is going to start in these dev orgs or scratch orgs. And that's going to be migrated up through a series of sandboxes where you should be doing specific types of testing. So it's going to slightly enforce the idea that, hey, you need to start in a dev org or a scratch org. You need to move that into an org where you then kind of build a package release of, here are all the changes that have come from multiple different orgs. Here's me testing to make sure they all work together, and then move them to a staging org potentially to make sure that when they land in production that they don't cause any issues. and then from staging to prod. So you'll be able to kind of define your own pipelines, and I'll show you what those look like in DevOps Center. But it does introduce this concept of here is how you actually get changes to production, which will be really helpful. Before this, is kind of the Wild West. You could just kind of do whatever you want, or maybe it wasn't the Wild West, but you did not have guidance on what this was really supposed to look like in app. So it'll allow you to kind of mature and do things in a much more less de-risk strategy to get things to production.
Yeah, fantastic. And this is a great new skill set to learn, right? Because this is how the rest of the world does it outside of Salesforce.
Yeah. But instead of like being intimidated by having to learn some new skills, you can just think of it as Salesforce is giving you a framework to just do this for you. Like not necessarily you have to become a Scrum Master or something like that. This gives you a framework to already start on, and you don't have to go sit in some boring 2-week seminar around how to, give something story points or something like that. This is Salesforce giving you more tools to do what they've been recommending all along.
Yeah, that's great. And we got a question by Alistair there saying it's quite time consuming to set up scratch orgs, but I think we're going to be addressing that in a minute. So Alistair, well, I'll leave your question for now. So as well as using developer and scratch orgs, what else can you tell us about the considerations for adopting the DevOps Center into your deployment processes?
Yeah, so, like that question that just came in, dev orgs and scratch orgs are maybe not rich enough for most development. There's some setup that you have to do. So you're going to have to figure out a way to set up the metadata that you need to go into these, or possibly the data as well. And what Salesforce gives you right now is kind of really like a developer heavy task to do that. You have to make a definition file or an org shape to say what's going to go into that scratch org, which can be a bit of work up front, but the value for that upfront work is huge because you get these purpose-built orgs that can, manage a bunch of different tasks. So, and they're available immediately, which is great. Kind of a trade-off for this is you also maybe need a bit more rigorous testing throughout the path going up to production, which I don't really see that as a bad thing. You need to be doing more of testing, but a challenge here is that, you're making all this stuff and you're potentially using a bunch of dev orgs and scratch orgs as Salesforce recommends, having dev orgs as part of your pipeline for short-term work, and then maybe long-term projects are in other dev orgs. There's not necessarily a good way inside of DevOps Center to keep all these in sync if they're not in the same pipeline. So you'll have to have some type of strategy to feed into the long-term development pipeline what's going on in your short-term, so that it has all the fields available, that you can make sure that those are taken into account in any type of work that's going on in long-term projects. So along with that, like there's not really a way in DevOps Center or Salesforce to maybe move things sideways or backwards without reverting to change sets. So I work for Proudly, and we have solutions for that, which I'll show you in a bit. And then finally, another thing that might be tricky for adoption is to pick up the changes inside of DevOps Center. You have to be using orgs that have source tracking. So we saw a good deal of people were not using dev orgs or scratch orgs in their development process. So you really won't be able to use DevOps Center without that, because only dev orgs and scratch orgs can you turn on the source tracking, which is how DevOps Center picks up your changes, and you're not having to go through 100 pages and change sets to find what you need. So that's something that you're going to have to consider. So these are the kind of the big three things, like how do I make scratch orgs easy to use? How do I then keep those all in sync if I have a bunch of in-flight work, if I'm on a big team, or I have hired consultants to work on a specific project for me? And then how do I, make sure that I'm using these orgs that have source tracking turned on?
Great, thank you very much, Derek. So the next thing, and something that's very important with DevOps Center as well, is environment management. So do you mind giving us a little introduction into what environment management is?
Yeah, sure. So environment management is how you most optimally use the resources that you have available to you. And in Salesforce example, it's orgs. And you want to make sure that you're doing this in a way that makes everyone's life easier, not harder. And I truly believe that using more developer orgs and using more Scratch orgs does make everyone's life easier once you've figured out kind of the initial planning of how do we go make this jump and step. And it will fuel all aspects of DevOps execution and give you different hooks for potential automation. You can, get out of needing, someone to stay up late on a Friday night to push all your changes so they don't impact, end users. If you have this, concept of really following DevOps, you can then automate those deployments because you've already tested everything. You already know that it's going to be in good shape when it's prod, and you can push that to some type of automation functionality to do it so it's not a manual task to be updating production. And the good news is you don't have to wait for DevOps Center to start figuring out your strategy. There are tools in the market, and there are, just things in Salesforce that can help you start figuring out your strategy before this lands. So you can already be figuring out how to use Scratch orgs a little better. You can already figure out how to make a definition file or get an org shape or something like that if you need that to start using Scratch orgs. Or even more simply, you can figure out if you can turn on Developer Hub and turn on source tracking and things like that, and just developer orgs if you're already using those.
Great. And what exactly is a rich developer environment when you're talking about environment management?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that people don't really take the time to make rich environments when they're using developer orgs or Scratch orgs. And the idea is that you want these dev environments or Scratch orgs to look like miniature versions of production and have them available on demand. So people love having full copy sandboxes at their disposal because they are a rich environment. They do have all the exact metadata copies. They have all the exact data copies from prod, but no one is refreshing those every 29 days. There are some people, some organizations that I've seen that are close to that, but it's more common that there's so many roadblocks and people saying, oh no, please don't refresh this. You're gonna wipe out a bunch of work I just either did directly in a full copy or migrated to a full copy, that you're not getting the best value out of your full copies if you're always hamstrung on being able to refresh them. So the rich environment has the right metadata. So maybe you don't need everything for what you're working on. Maybe you just need like 2 managed packages and just all the general platform customizations that you've made. You need a standard set of test data that you always want. I like to refer to this as golden data. So that when you go to your full copy, if you're a big organization, you'll have tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of accounts. You don't need all of those, or at least you're not going to be going to every single one of them to do a regression test. You have your top 5 or top 50 accounts that you care about. You want to have a standard set of that data that you'll always want to test, and you can seed that into your developer orgs or Scratch orgs. And then there might be specific project data that you need. So if you're using a product like Financial Force or Salesforce CPQ or Conga or a lot of these app exchange products that are super popular, they rely on data for their configuration. It's almost like the code. You'll need to sync that into the orgs as well. So understanding the scope of the data that you actually care about is important and will help you get rich environments as well as be able to refresh your full copy more often, which you could be paying a lot of money for those. So it's a good thing about here.
Cool, thank you. And then when you're talking about environment management, what does is there a standard sort of pipeline that you would use with the DevOps Center?
Yeah, so I really, even just like the default pipelines in DevOps Center are really good for maybe a small team or sometimes larger teams where you start everything in one of these rich seeded setup dev orgs or scratch orgs. And then I would recommend at least 2 sandbox steps before you get to production. Have one for kind of integration testing. And what I mean by that is testing all of the components that have been moved up from these dev orgs to make sure they work together and are nice and past just general regression testing or maybe some user testing. And then have at least one other step up where you are using a staging org to make sure that the deployment is going to be just fine when it lands in prod. Another testing stage you might want or require, depending on the size of your company, would be to have a specific UAT, user acceptance testing node in those steps. So that's what I would recommend, and you'll kind of see that in this next slide as well. This is what Devops Center looks like. And so this is what a new pipeline is. So like I mentioned, it starts kind of in this point 1, where these are all of your dev orgs that you might be using for a project. And one thing to note is pipelines are aligned to projects. Every project can have its own unique pipeline for what you're doing. And then as you move forward, you will move this to like, can't really see what this is. So to an integration or to UAT to staging. The thing to note though is that everything starts with production. So the production data is going to be sent into these development environments. It's going to be sent into the existing main branch here as well. So production sets up the framework for how your changes are going to be tracked across all these other environments. So move to integration, then move to UAT, staging, and then production is what we'd recommend for how these pipelines should work. And that's what I would recommend as well.
Cool. Great, thanks, Derek. So, I mean, you can see here we've got a few standard fields per each step. So we've obviously got the stage name, what's happening, the environment where this is taking place, and then we've got the branch, which I believe is the version control system. But then we've got this is a bundling stage at the bottom. What does this exactly mean?
Yeah, so that's a great question to ask, and I talked about this a little bit earlier. So as we mentioned, the source tracking is like a big key to all of this. So when you are setting up these branches, Devops Center requires that you have a connection to GitHub. When you start a new project, it's going to take a copy of production and push that into your repository. Then the source tracking will know in your lower environment, so like in the stage 1 or stage 3, if these are developer orgs or scratch orgs, you'll be able to pick up and track the changes that are going into them through the integration to GitHub. It's going to automatically show you what's been changed, and you can pick and choose what you want to move to the next stage. Once you get to a stage where you're no longer using orgs with source tracking in them, that's what we consider the bundling stage. And bundling is a concept of packaging all of the work items together as part of a release. So once you bundle, those work items move forward as like a big, package release, kind of like a completed change set would look like if you're going to reuse a change set. So when it's in the bundling stage, you're no longer really using this track changes anymore. You've built a package, and you're going to move everything together from, in this scenario, from UAT to staging. So we move a bunch of different pieces of the puzzle from our development environments into integration. And integration, we can still change things, pick and choose different pieces that we may want to move into UAT. But once we've kind of chosen everything that we want to put together in a package, it's going to land in UAT, and it's going to be kind of stuck together at that point. And then that package can be moved forward to staging after it's passed all your acceptance testing. And then once we've proven that, hey, when this is going to land into production okay by testing it and staging, you can move that package up to production.
Nice, very slick. Thank you.
Cool.
So if we move on to the next slide now, so this is a great chart which does show you which org to use for which type of environment. But what's kind of the meaning behind this table?
Yeah, sure. So again, this is a Salesforce recommendation. This slide is kind of stolen from a Salesforce Accelerator, but we didn't use their branding on it. So you may have seen this elsewhere. And I really recommend, hearing what Salesforce has to say about application lifecycle management and how you should build things and how you should use orgs. But these are, of course, the different types of sandbox resources that Salesforce gives you, and then what they recommend to do with those. So here you can see that they only recommend that you do new build work. That's what we mean by development. So, making new fields and flows and things like that to make sure they work together. They only recommend doing those in Scratch orgs, developer sandboxes, and Dev Pro sandboxes. The next kind of phase, and here as we move down these rows here, is where to do like integration and like test that all of the dev work is working together. Again, they recommend doing that in Dev Pros, which I don't see a lot of people using Dev Pros for this. Honestly, it's mostly partial and full copies because of the size limitations there. But if you have a small org, a Dev Pro might be fine. And then doing UAT only in like partial or full copy sandboxes. And Salesforce really makes that recommendation because of that addiction to data that I talked about a little bit ago, that these have, those accounts that are going to be go-to accounts. But if you have a tool like Probably that can do data seeding, you can do UAT in pretty much any type of org because you have, a data set that has, the top 100 accounts that you care about. And I really strongly agree with this recommendation that you just use full copies really just for staging. That's where they're best used, potentially for like production hotfixes or something like that, which we don't see on here. But this is what Salesforce recommends that you use their types of sandboxes for. So that's what we'd recommend as well.
Great, thank you very much, Derek. So next, so a lot of you might have heard about the DX experience, and obviously as we've covered already, DX experience is largely code-based for developers, but what we're talking about here is something more for the admin side, a much more user-friendly UI. And Derek, I know you're going to run through in a minute how admins can create Scratch orgs a lot more effectively, but do you mind talking a bit through how you create a DX experience normally, or sorry, create a Scratch org normally?
Yeah, sure. So it's not too scary if you're not afraid of the dev console. So you have to do a few things. You'll need to install a DX plugin that gives you effectively access to this command line interface. You'll need to turn on DevHub, which is easy. Anyone can do that. You just click on a button inside of setup that turns on DevHub for you. And then to create an org, you'll need to, as I've mentioned a bunch of times through this conversation, the concept of a org shape or a definition file. What those are they are selecting the components that you want to go into the Scratch org. So you can select specific metadata components, like I only want 4 or 5 managed packages, not the 200 that I have installed in production, and I want some type of data. And the data is a little bit tricky inside of DX. You basically have to craft a JSON file to, pick and choose the data that you want in there. And then after you have, set up your definition file, you'll set up a DX project for this, which we have a bit of a screenshot here of what that looks like. And then you'll run a create command to generate a Scratch org. So for developers, this is easy. This just takes a little bit, and then your Scratch org is available immediately, which is the great, point of that. So after you've done this setup of, your definition files, you can have these basically on demand. And I think this is the last conversation point before we go into the demo. Ben, is there
I think
anything else to
so.
bring up?
No, let's see it.
Okay. So I'll have to change some things around here.
Just while you
Share.
do that, just had a question from Chris, who just said, is it being recorded? And it is indeed Chris. So anyone that's wondering that can access it afterwards.
Yeah. And it looks like this is switched over to
Yep, all good.
So what I'm going to be showing you is how Proudly is planning to integrate with Devops Center. We've already built some stuff that's going to GA along with Devops Center as it GAs. And we have a tight integration to Devops Center, but there's no requirement to use our product with DevOps Center. You'll be able to use all this stuff with or without DevOps Center. So if you're kind of afraid of using DX, or you don't want to use source control, this will allow you to do a bunch of the same stuff. But we want to talk about how to kind of lower the barrier of entry to using DevOps Center. And as well, I'll be showing you, you can see I have a DevOps Center tab open, what DevOps Center looks like and how it works. So to kind of tell a story here, I'm going to put myself in the shoes of an admin and say that here are my projects as an admin. I've been working on this add current year and next year ARR fields to accounts because we want to know what our annual recurring revenue is for a current fiscal year as well as next year on all of our accounts out at a glance, so we can do some reports and things like that, as well as update pricing and promotions for Q2. So let's just pretend that we're on the Salesforce calendar like we are here at Proudly, and that our Q2 starts May 1, so we need to do some things. I've already done a lot of work for this add current and next year to accounts. So this project has been set up for me. It has a description of what we need to do. And a Proudly concept is we have a change template of a CPQ project. CPQ is near and dear to my heart. So we have this installed in our org. And like I mentioned, CPQ requires data template for everything that's there. So this change template is going to already have everything that we need to define our Scratch org. So you have a template org, we have a deployment plan, which is a bunch of data that will flow in, and then we have the metadata types that we care about: objects, flows, workflow rules, permission sets, and profiles. So this is what's already set up for this project. And then I have my user stories that are going to have different things that I need to create. So you can see that I've completed some of these things. Create current year fields, that's easy enough. Create a flow, I'm working on it. I think I actually may have deployed this earlier today, but update layouts, it's easy enough, and update the profiles. And then this piece of update calculation price rules. So this is something in CPQ where I would need to go update a bunch of record data. From here, also, I can make environments. So there's assigned environments here that I've been working on. These are my Scratch orgs that have stuff in them. I finished all of the user stories here that are like completed or in development. And this ARR calc org, I haven't started the stuff that I'm going to use this ARR calc 2 org for. So I want to actually go back to my other project and talk about what else I need to do. So I need to update pricing and promotions for Q2. So I've started on this a bit. I need to create a promotion eligible checkbox on opportunities, create a flow to flag these opportunities if they're eligible for a promotion, and update the page layouts, update the product catalog. For this, what Proudly is going to give you is the ability to just add a button click, create a new environment. Because I've already picked my change template that I need, we'll read this template and we'll just simply, make a new environment. And I'll save it. And it will generate a Scratch org for me. So I'll have this environment URL. Then I can also use Proudly's product AppOps release to send data to my Scratch orgs if I need to. So I have like the CPQ dev environment, and I can pick data that I might care about. So maybe I want accounts, or maybe I want price rules that I need I can pick a source, so I can move data from production into CPQ dev. I'm going to skip this for now, but I'll show you what the final product looks like. It takes, 5-10 minutes to do this, and we were trying to just do a quick 5-10 minute demo total. So this, I'm skipping over to what Devops Center looks like. So Devops Center is just another app, and we've mirrored all of the records that we've created and probably into Devops Center. So if you're using Devops Center, you can use that to pick up and move your changes around. So I'll show you what kind of some completed work looks like on this add current year, next year ARR. So I click into the project. All right, there we go. I have all my work items here. You can see some have been promoted, some are ready to promote, some are in progress. When I go to a work item, I already have my changes loaded here. So my work item was to update my profile, so I can update the admin profile that it's already found. So this is how you would find what's there. And then to commit changes, I can say, put in a commit message, profile complete, and push this to the repository. And after that is committed, you can see that's changed, and I can move this up the stages. That might not make much sense looking at it right that way. So I'm going to actually go to the other project that has less stuff in it. So I need to update pricing for Q2 as well. So here I have a bunch of in progress work. I actually finished some of this work in the connected org earlier, but I need to create a flow for this. And to move this flow, all I have to do is pick the CPQ dev environment, and I can click connect. And this is how quickly it shows you all the changes that you have. So with a click of a button, I can automatically find everything that I might want to promote. For this change, I can just link the single, update the flow as part of this change, and I can go to my other changes to bring in the other ones. Or if you have broad enough work items, you could just put in every single one of these things here. I'll just do that for funsies. I'll just put everything in this box. Say, finished all my work. And I can commit my changes. This, of course, moves it up along a pipeline. I might need to progress this or something like that, but I'll go ahead and show the pipeline for where we finished a bunch of work. Right? Actually, yeah, I'll need to switch my project. So here's my work items, here are my stages, and you can see where we've moved, different things up. And I can select these and say that they're ready to be promoted. We're gonna skip this login step, but if I was logged into all my orgs, it would go ahead and move those to the next stage for me. So this is a really cool, new way to manage changes. Obviously, so much faster and nicer than change sets. So you could really imagine how much drudge work and free time this can give you to do more work and just spend more time actually developing and making changes rather than managing change sets or something like that. So a piece of this is how Probably has been supporting this, and that's what I want to show you here as well. So another thing to note is I have these separate pipelines here where I have update pricing and promotion, as well as this current year and next year ARR to accounts. If I wanted to feed the changes that I have here, like this new ARR field and the flow and everything, into my other dev orgs, there's not a way to do that inside of Devops Center. So probably allows you to, this is now our product, to connect to any two orgs. So I can move stuff from CPQ dev into this ARR calc 2 or I haven't started any work yet, but I still want all that information there. So I can pick a source org and a destination org. So in this case, I have 2 scratch orgs, and I can find what's been changed between them. So I have my flow. I've made some changes to opportunity, so I can find that I have this checkbox that I need to move, and I need to maybe update the opportunity page layout, as well as maybe permission sets or something like that. So you can use Proudly to connect to any different 2 types of orgs, and there's no pipeline enforcement here. So it can allow you to keep your short-term or long-term projects that are all be done in Dev or Scratch orgs in sync, as well as maybe move stuff from those orgs that don't have source tracking back and forth. So if you find something that is a little off in UAT that you need to maybe send back for some refinement, you can pick a different source that you need to move that from. We also, of course, allow for data deployments. So if I needed to move some configuration data or set up a Scratch org initially, I can pick data sets of my accounts or any of my CPQ objects that I care about and push those from an org. And what these deployments look like and do is they can take a whole bunch of relational data inside of Salesforce and move it from a source to a destination. So in this example, I moved an entire CPQ implementation from a source to a destination. I moved all my price rules. I moved my product rules. If you're not familiar with CPQ, you can think of this as just related data. Like here, I have an example of accounts with contacts, opportunities, and opportunity products. So with a click of a button, when I'm pushing that data set, I'm finding all these things and making sure that all the relationships are matched up. And I'm not using CSVs or a data loader to do this. This is everything automatically. So as a admin using Proudly with Devops Center, I can quickly and easily make Scratch orgs without needing to go into any type of command line. I can pick and choose which data I need to seed from production into my Scratch orgs or Dev orgs. So they're just as good basically as a full copy sometimes, because I have all the stuff that I'm actually going to look at. I have my 183 accounts that I care about, not my 10,000 accounts where like I'm never going to look at 99% of them. And I think that's really all I have for the demo.
Great. Thank you so much, Derek. That was fascinating. And if anyone's any more info, feel free to get in touch with Proudly. They really know what they're talking about when it comes to DevOps and AppOps, which I think is a kind of category you're trying to define, right? Things like complicated apps like CPQ and things like that are an absolute nightmare to deal with. So yeah, get in touch with Proudly if you're interested in anything you've seen today. We're going to take some questions now. We're going to have to do quite a quick fire round because we have a lot of questions and not much time. So
we have this question of, my experience of Scratch orgs is that you need a dev to set it all up, which is time consuming. That's not really going to change. So that's something I did show inside of Proudly. We will automatically create an org shape file for you based off of whatever org you pick as a source. So that is something that will eliminate a lot of that work for you, where you don't necessarily need a dev to set that up. And there's a question around, will Devops Center provide tools for automated testing? I don't believe there are any plans for that at the moment. Ben, have you seen any good questions in here yet?
Here's quite a simple one. Will it do destructive changes?
I believe that it's
simple.
So that would be effectively a difference. Like if you deleted something out, you could potentially do that. I know with Proudly, we have this question that comes up a lot because we do a lot of similar things in our product. We gate that. You can do destructive changes, but we hide it behind a setting And we want to make it very clear that you know what you're doing when you click on this button, that you're about to delete some stuff. So I'm sure Salesforce will have some similar functionality with some similar gates. I don't know fully what the extent of destructive changes that they're going to allow.
Great, thank you. And here's quite a good one. What is the definition of staging? How is it different from UAT?
Yeah, that's a great question. So UAT, you're going to be interacting a lot with end users. So UAT is, of course, user acceptance testing. You may find things in UAT that need to be changed, and you don't want that to be in a staging environment. So UAT should be its own branch and discipline where you're looking to make sure that this is actually what people want to land into production. Staging should only be getting accepted changes out of UAT to test effectively the impact of a deployment to production. So there are different things. Staging, you're making sure that you don't blow up prod with all your new changes. UAT is making sure that the changes are what people actually want. So you really do want to do those in two separate stages.
Cool, great, thank you, Derek. Another one from Grace, actually, and I think you might have answered this earlier with data seeding, but what if you don't have access to a full sandbox?
So with data seeding, yeah, if you don't have access to a full, with Prodly, you can push data from production into, a developer org. So it's a great way to avoid having to buy a full copy. And yeah, you always have that data in prod that you can use as a source to seed into other orgs. If there are any security issues, like you don't want to push sensitive information, Prodly at least offers data masking for specific fields. So you can just put in like some randomly generated name for every name fields, or hide phone numbers and put in like fake ones, things like that. That it's still all the exact like data structure, but the values change a little bit to make sure that you're not sending a contractor actual real live customer information.
Great. A question got asked about hiding data as you were asking that, and you answered it while you're answering that question. So that's two done, two birds with one stone. Any options for a rollback?
Well, that's kind of why you have a repository in place. So with Devops Center, I believe you would need to do some direct kind of intervention inside of GitHub to bring your branch back to what it was before, and then deploy from the branch into production. I don't know exactly how Devops Center is looking to support rollbacks. The best that they offer right now is you can effectively like roll back, or you can push changes back into all of the dev orgs that are in a pipeline. So with Devops Center, I'm not fully sure what their rollback capabilities are. Probably we do have rollback capabilities for data deployments right now. So you can restore all your config data if you need to. And we're looking to maybe just have simple rollback capabilities for metadata as well, to make that something that you don't need to log into GitHub or use any command line to do, that you would need to do right now with Devops Center, DX, and GitHub.
Okay, fantastic. And I think we've got time for one more. How do you do conflict resolution? That was one question. There was also another question somewhere I saw, which was about conflict resolution with profiles.
Yeah, so conflict resolution, that's why you have kind of this defined pipeline, and you have an integration org to manage that. So the integration org is going to be where you resolve conflicts. If you're doing this all outside of command line and ignoring GitHub and things like that, you will need to do that inside the org itself and make the changes there, and then push them to like a bundling stage where they're all put together to manage conflicts. If you are a bit more developer centric, you can of course do these types of things directly in your repository.
Great, thank you, Derek. Well, I think it's best if we end there. There are quite a lot of questions, so apologies that we couldn't get through, but feel free to get in touch with Prodly. You can also see a link down there, prodly.co/get-demo. So Derek, thank you very much for your time today. It was a pleasure. Any final words at all?
I don't think so. I hope everyone is, excited about DevOps Center, and looking forward to using more scratch orgs. Use more scratch orgs, people.
Great. Hopefully we'll see a rise in that 4% next time. Thanks a lot, Derek. Thanks for your time. And thanks for joining, everyone. Thank you. Bye.